Right. Broadcast is live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm here with Rik Hoskin, one of my only collaborators.
I'm still holding it.
You're still holding it? You gotta scoot it over, man. All right. No, the other direction. Okay, so we're here with Rik Hoskin, who is one of my collaborators on Sons of Ares, graphic novels for the Red Rising universe. However, he is here to discuss Bystander 27, but I'm sure we can cajole, hopefully, some talking about Red Rising with you. But first, Rik, how's England?
Cold. That's not true, actually. We've been having a heat wave for about 2 weeks, so that's been all right.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm around that.
I'm sorry, buddy. You just disappeared for 20 seconds. LA's good. I mean, we can talk about three things: either traffic,
this is the point where the whole signal just breaks.
Or apocalyptic fires, or the traffic. So, no, it's good. But anyway, it's one of the first times we've actually gotten to see each other face to face. I think the other time was about an hour ago, wasn't it? So, first off, I wanted to start talking about.
It was, yeah.
All right. First, I want to start talking about Bystander 27 before we move into the kind of Sons of Ares world. And I wanted to kind of dive into what your inspiration was for Bystander 27. But first, if you could give us a little bit of like a 20-second, what is, or it can be 30 seconds, it can be 40 seconds, but what is Bystander 27?
Okay, well, Bystander 27 is about, it's a modern day science fiction novel. It's set in the world of superheroes. So it's the world you'd probably recognize from Marvel Comics or DC Comics or the Marvel movies. But it's from the point of view of a bystander. And he's a guy who doesn't have superpowers, and he sees a cataclysmic event that results in the death of his wife, and he doesn't go looking for revenge. He just starts to investigate why all these superheroes and supervillains do a lot of fighting with each other. And that's the essence of it. And it's breaking apart and breaking down the idea of what a superhero universe is and how it works. And in good science fiction style, it starts to look into what the reality really is and what his reality really is. And that's it. That's the summary.
It's way better elevator pitch than I had for Red Rising when I started. They were like, give me a 20-second pitch. I'm like 5 minutes later. So mankind has terraformed the solar system, and it's like you can go any from there. So with Bystander 27, it seems obviously we've had a glut of superhero things in the last, I don't know, like 15 years it seems, or 10 years. Yeah. Was it that glut that inspired you to write Bystander 27? To critique the genre, or what was the inspiration?
No, to be honest, I am the hugest comic book fan. I mean, I love to read through comics. So I am still a hardcore Marvel Comics fan, particularly in DC to some extent. Mm-hmm. And I was reading a lot of old comics, and I was just looking at all these crowd scenes where you've got your Galactus space god arriving, and he's fighting on the streets of New York. And if you look at those stories, there's always people like watching from the roofs or in the streets. There's all these incredible things happen. They're always living in a war zone. And I thought, what are these guys thinking? Because this is happening to them month after month. Sure, and with comic book time, the way that characters age, it's actually probably happened to them about once every sort of 18 hours. Somebody's invading.
Pretty concentrated time schedule, yeah.
Yeah, and I just like the idea of what's the background guy doing, and I thought I'd get into his story, and it built around that, really.
All right.
I'm really sorry. Should we try again? You were asking about John Hayes and about how I come up with characters.
Yes.
I largely let them write themselves, so I think there's something all in your head that just goes, this is your character, and just throws it at you. That's what I find anyway. I'm sure for other people, and perhaps for yourself, I should ask, how do you come up with your characters?
I mean, I admire the people that can write their characters down beforehand, create a dossier, have 50 questions that, what's their favorite character's favorite food? What does the character do on their downtime? What do they like, wool socks or I don't know, acrylic socks? Is that a thing? But I find myself in the same boat as you. The characters often are unconscious parts of myself that then you let come alive on page, and hopefully they fill out and flesh out more than they do in your outline, because you see my outlines. You know, my outlines are written from a place where I hope there's a degree of of unconscious writing going on. So the outlines are meant to get characters into situations which, you know, the character then has to make a choice, and that often changes the outline. So the outlines are pretty fluid from what the first product is to the final product, and I think you've seen that with our collaboration.
Definitely, and you find that characters tend to tell you whether you're doing it wrong. It's like you try and put them in situations like, no, I'm not going to react like that, and you're like, oh, okay, we'll try again.
Exactly, and people talk about writer's block, and I think that's where writer's block comes up for me, when I put a character in a situation that they would not have gotten themselves into, and they're making a decision to get out of it, which they would not make, and then so you're sitting there for a couple weeks or a couple days, and then you realize the whole scene's wrong, and you just revamp it.
Yeah, and you have that dreadful, dreadful moment where you throw away a chapter. You're like, oh man, what have I done?
Okay, so what's the most amount of work you've lost at one time? What's the most amount of work you've lost at one time?
I know. I think I started a novel for an ongoing series, and I wrote about 25,000 words, 30,000 words, and then I realised, which I think is about 100 pages of paperback, and I realised it wasn't working, and I just chucked it and I started it again because I'd sold the outline, which I think was about a paragraph. I'm very brief with outlines.
It sounds like one of my outlines.
And so I started it again. I started that book again, and I caught up to that 30,000 word mark in about 3 days. I just really, because I knew what was going to happen, but I knew that the first time around I'd paced it so badly.
Well, sometimes
so that's the
gotta rewrite that. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you recovered pretty quickly.
As you're struggling, the more you're struggling, the slower you write, and then no, it's not going to work.
I mean, then the anxiety builds, and the anxiety builds, and the imposter syndrome creeps, and then you're like, oh, the mortgage is still due.
Exactly. Or you just find you're doing other stuff too much. You know, there's only so much junk you can look at on eBay.
Sure. So let's go back to your childhood love of comics.
Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite, and why did it resonate the most with you?
I was a Marvel kid, and I probably still am. I love Spider-Man. I really adored the Avengers, and I came in on the Avengers. In the UK, we got a lot of reprints somewhat after stuff had happened. So I really read that perfect era of the Avengers about the late 60s, early 70s, when you had the introduction of the Vision and characters like that. And I just adored it. And the Avengers really sort of hold a special place for me. But other stuff, there were always other titles. As a child, I liked any title that had more than one character in it, because I just like to see all these new characters every month, and then I could come up with my own. It sort of taught me how to do it, I suppose, and here I am still doing it.
Do you think that was probably the key component to making you be a writer, is the introduction of new characters, and then you're in your head at school or wherever else, and if they're just dancing behind your eyes?
I think so. I think you sort of have this sense of what characters are like, and I found one of the things I've done recently is I ended up editing a video game, and I was sort of helping other writers, and they're like, how do you find voices for these guys? Like, don't you have all these voices already? You know, they should all be with you, and you kind of build on those things, you know, because he's kind of like this guy. Well, work with that, and what would that actor say? What would that character say? And it's easy when you're given a license and you're asked to write, you know, Star Wars, and you're writing Han Solo. You know how Han Solo is going to speak, so you've got to do that with your own characters as well.
I totally agree, but I think the funny thing is that we're often asked how we come up with characters, or what's the root of a character? Did it base it off someone in your own life? But I think, you know, perhaps the thing that's lost is how many of these characters are composites. They're you know, perhaps 5% of someone you know, perhaps 15% of, I don't know, the personality of a dog you know. But then it all compiles somehow in this jambalaya to create a character that you can't really articulate maybe what they're like, but you can write them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also sometimes I find it's like lines or names, and you think, I really want to get that line in, and you sort of you'll find the character
Oh
for it
man, that's
2
my
years later.
problem. Sure. My problem is I'll write in scenes or lines I want, and I'll create a whole character just to deliver that line, and my editor will tell me we don't have time for this, or you already have 90 characters, maybe just don't create a new one. Yeah, but the fun thing is that creation of a new one. When you're doing like this big. One of my things is when you do a big physical introduction of a scene, and you're doing kind of perhaps your main character is there, and then you want to have someone like talking to them off screen, then you introduce that character. It's like the judgment of what you just saw, and that one character says something pithy or something ominous or whatever, and then you pivot to that character. I love that. That's one of my favorite things, is because we're like, now the whole focus, and it's totally unnecessary, and I create so many characters that don't even make it onto the page because they but I created this guy named Valerius Outfault the other day. He probably won't make it in the final draft, but there's aphorisms you want to use. There's a couple quotes you probably like jotted down somewhere in like a spiral notebook, and then you put it on page. Like that character now exists, and I fight 2 months for my editors with it, and then we just kill them off.
The editors or the characters?
Well, for my lawyer requests, I take the fifth on that one. So no. So out of curiosity, because you kind of bounce back and forth between the mediums, between graphic novels or comics, well, actually, which do you prefer to call it, comics or graphic novels?
I'm happy. Call them comics. That's what they've always been, isn't it?
Cool. I think you're an old school. All right, so the comic, because graphic novels is just dressing it up in order to make people feel more comfortable looking at it from a literary perspective, right?
I don't need to be grown up about reading comics. I know what I'm doing.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're both children here. So which do you prefer writing, comics or novels?
They are different experiences. The thing about comics and other stuff as well, I mean, I've worked in a few other mediums as well, but the thing about comics is it's a collaboration. So what you're doing is you're trying to do your best for somebody else so they can then bring their best to it. And so you're always working. I suppose it's a bit like being in a band, as if, I've got no experience of that, but so I would get your outline for the story, and I'm turning it into a comic, and I understand how to do the visuals on it and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to write dialogue like you, and you'll come in and you'll then do your bit to it. And everybody's, you're polishing my script, and everybody's trying to get their best out of it, and it's going to the artist. And you get all this feedback from everybody all the time, which makes it a really sort of organic process. It's really alive. Whereas when you're writing books, it's just you and a screen, and you're just kind of on your own. And the most response you're going to get is, in my case, I've got a couple of readers. My wife will perhaps read a book if it's not too grisly. I've got a close friend, and I'm going to say my friend Nick, who's probably indeed watching this and is probably cheering as I say that.
I know.
He'll come back to me and he'll read it, and he'll read it very objectively. So I try to find people who do that. But you are, a lot of the time, it's just you and the screen for weeks on end thinking, how do I get to the next bit?
I know, and I think that's the difficulty in novels. You're just alone on a raft.
Yeah. And you can be adrift.
I know, and the best advice I ever got, I was really struggling with my last book, and I agreed to do an event for Terry Brooks up in the Pacific Northwest, and so I went up there and did the event, even though I was kind of in the throes of exhaustion and insecurity, because I was like, I'm an idiot, I can't figure out my book, And Terry, I mean, it's not like Terry didn't give me plot advice or anything, but he just, he's sitting there with his wine and he's just saying, trust the process. You have an editor, throw things at the wall, which is still a very difficult thing to do when you're a novelist. And I know all the advice I'd give myself to get out of these predicaments, sometimes when you're alone on the screen for weeks on end, but in reality, it's almost like going back to the default of how you started being a writer, which is flow of consciousness, right? Yeah. Just putting it down on the page and just being blah. And you'll find what sticks. But I think that the difficulty a lot of times for people who've done this a few times, I mean, how many books have you written? Over 20 at this point, right?
I think it's 30 something. I have lost count.
I mean, that's kind of cool in and of itself, but you have the ability to somehow overcome that resistance, You know, the
Yeah.
resistant that makes you sit down. What do you attribute that to?
I think the most important thing, I've been full-time freelance for, I think, 12, 13 years now. And the thing I learned very quickly was that some days you're just not going to write, no matter how hard you try. And it's not worth pushing against it. So those are the days where you just walk away and you go, I'm just going to walk. I'm just going to
You can walk away.
Walk and walk and walk. Yeah.
Oh,
Literally
man.
walk away from the screen, get away from everything, and just see where you can go from there and come back to it another day. Because if you try and write in those days, the next day you read it and you think, this is terrible. Why did I bother? I spent all day writing a terrible 1,000 words.
Yeah, sure.
And the next day you'll write a brilliant 5,000 words. So.
I mean, those 5,000 word days are amazing, but sometimes it is the 500 words or 1,000 word days. But I sit there, you know, I come up and I'm all upright and very excited for the morning, and then somehow I'll just go astray. And then slowly by the end of the day, I'll be like Quasimodo underneath this, you know, kind of giant evil monkey on my back that's pressing me down saying, well, if you don't write, your life is over, you know? And so you just write and then you look back at it. It is very much as you say, dreadful, you know, and you're like, delete. But the thing is, then you've had that opportunity cost, right? You just did something that you knew wasn't going to be good, kind of, instead of walking away and refreshing yourself. And I think it's a difficult thing, particularly when you get advice like, you know, Stephen King gives, which is you have to write every day. Or you get advice like, have you ever read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield? Which I adore the book and I adore the rest of his fiction. You don't like it. It's not for you.
I haven't read it.
Oh, you haven't read it? Okay, The War of Art. Weirdly enough, I'm not advertising it, but here it is. It's kind of like a Bible line, like how to overcome resistance, I suppose. Resistance being that, you know, the thing on your back that makes you not sit down, or when you do sit down, it makes you open up 6 different tabs on your computer. Yeah. Maybe you don't have that problem. Okay. All right. So
when you've written 30 books, I probably don't have time for that problem.
You don't have time for that problem. Unfortunately, I'm lagging behind you with 5.
No.
One day I'll catch up. Not so sure about it. But anyway, I know that we're going to want to get to a question and answer session here pretty soon. So if you guys who are watching begin to start having questions, I think you can send them to the moderator and we can start compiling them. We're not going to jump into it quite yet, just a forewarning so that you guys can start piling up questions. Oh, we already have some coming in. Okay, cool. Well, should we take some right now, Sam? All right, so the question is, if some characters are hidden in an unconscious part of yourself, which part of yourself are you scared of? Well, I mean, I think you can, if you know my books, you'll know that it's the Jackal, whom was one of my favorite characters to ever write. And it's mostly because he just kind of kept coming alive on page. When I first read Rising, it wasn't from an outline. It was exploring it as it was going. So the only way you knew about the Jackal was through the actions he did, through the crows flying south. And so he was sort of this character who left a thumbprint, but no one knew anything about him. And so getting to explore his character worried me a little bit that I had some unconscious sociopathic tendencies. Fortunately, I've kind of like gotten over that in my life. But I think there was a little stretch there where I was like, am I this evil? You know? And so far, I haven't put anyone in a box for 9 months. So I think that the jury's come back with a positive or negative verdicts, which is good. What was it like for me to collaborate first time with someone so experienced in it? Well, I think that first you have to understand how different the mediums are of graphic novels and novels. Novels very much, particularly the way I write them, are streams of consciousness. And so I'm in the character's head, being able to write it without really any outside influence. But in graphic novels, it's more of it's obviously a team effort because you have to work with the artists, the writer, for this instance Rik, because I furnished him with a script and with a story, and then he came back with a script, and then I added a lot of the dialogue, or I put my own spin on it. So collaborating, I suppose, was different, but also very nice because I'd be able to actually seem smarter than I am, because I get to use the best parts of Rik's stuff and then integrate my own things, but then also have someone like a visual artist like Eli Powell, who did the art for the Sons of Ares novels, bring it out. So while it doesn't necessarily represent exactly what is in my head or what the Red Rising world perhaps looks like through my eyes, It instead is what it looks like, and it is a take from this team's perspective. And that's fun because it allows me to take more chances. It allows me to explore the world more without necessarily having to carry all the burden. Plus, I get to wake up and get to see really fun, artwork or new scripts from other people that are in my world. So that in and of itself is something I never thought would happen. And in many ways, as a writer, that's a validation of the world that I got to build through Red Rising, and also in many ways gets to help me explore new tools in my arsenal and learn how to collaborate with the team. All right, we can keep going until we get Rik back, if you guys have any more questions. Was there a particular scene or image that particularly blew you away to see it come back from the artists? I'd have to say that my favorite is probably in Sons of Ares' Wrath, the second, which would be the visualizations that are created or the latter part of the comic, where Fitchner is out in the asteroid belt and Rihanna comes out there as well. Mostly because it's the first time that there's been a visual representation of like that sort of large stakes and ship combat and architecture in the Red Rising world. So it was unique for me to get to see that, and I think I was pretty excited about seeing the inks done. So the sketches were very cool, but when the inks were done of the planet Triton and the terraforming efforts there, I found it to be pretty compelling, mostly because I had never thought about some of the esoterica that might be involved in world building, or sorry, the world terraforming like they're doing on Triton. And so that would be one of my favorites, but then also the visual representation of Fitchner's first razor duel, which has this atavistic, almost like cave drawing type quality to it. Thanks for your patience, guys. Sorry the internet connectivity. I know it's peak hours right now in the UK, and sometimes I don't have the fiber wire. What's writing been like for you during lockdown? Have you found it harder, easier to concentrate on work? Oddly enough, at first I found it far more difficult, and I suppose it's ebbed and flowed. I think that the difficulty originally came about because of all the, well, I mean, you know, all the outside influences have been happening, especially, excuse me, living in a city like Los Angeles, where we had, well, a lot of things happen all at once. You know, we've been suffering through wildfires this last little while. We've been having heat wave. We've also had incredible, protesting, but then also some, I don't know how to say it, more friction in the society than usual. So it was really hard to have it not permeate the writing. And so I found myself with all the time in the world, but then no discipline, really. So I played a lot of video games at first, which is great. My favorites were Rome Total War, which I played as a kid and then I returned to. And then I played this awesome game called Stellaris, which is an interstellar like exploration and also conquest game. So then out of that, I started kind of beginning to write delving back into the sixth book, and found it at times more difficult, at times easier. But I think a lot of it just comes down to the amount of noise that we have going on in our society right now. It makes it difficult unless you just turn off the noise. So I've taken myself away from social media and taken myself away from the constant dopamine drip of news, or maybe torture drip of news. But I wish that I'd been more productive, I think, in the first several months of it. Now I finally got my routine down. But with multiple projects kind of in the air, I'm having to shift, several hour chunks back and forth. All right, until we get Rik coming back, I'm going to do as promised and read the first couple pages of Bystander 27. Everything changed when Hayes' wife died. He was waiting for her on the corner of 6th and West 24th Street, close to Madison Square Park, and she was late. That was Melanie all over. Late could have been her maiden name, and marriage hadn't changed her one iota. There was the other late, too. The one that had been good news for her and Hayes, and the reason they were meeting here today. Quote, she said over dinner, I'm late. Hayes looked up from the pasta he was working around the plate with his fork, a frown materializing on his forehead. Late, Melanie had replied. Late. He looked at her, trying to make sense of the words she was saying, as her brown eyes, the color of Turkish coffee, looked hopefully into his. She looked beautiful then. More beautiful then than the day they had gotten married 8 weeks after he had gotten his discharge from the service. You mean we're going to be a mommy? He said, knowing the words were jumbled and wrong, knowing she would laugh. Except Melanie didn't laugh. She smiled. She smiled a smile that engraved itself on his heart in that moment, and he realized they were going to be parents. Yes, Quo, she said, nodding. Isn't it perfect? Rik, he's back.
Yes, sorry, I actually moved location.
Oh, this is working really good.
I just thought I'd move house, just to try and get a better signal.
Fantastic. Now we can see the inside of your cupboard.
You can see the inside of my comic collection behind me.
Oh, that's your comic collection?
That is a lot of comics.
Here I thought those were lima beans behind you.
No. I'm not running a store. What are you thinking?
I didn't know. I don't know. I operate from a place of ignorance all the time.
I think you were just reading a really fantastic book there, and I missed most of it.
I was. Are you familiar with it?
So you've read it and you enjoyed it, and I just saw somebody sending us questions. So what have I missed?
Well, I'd love for people to start sending questions about Bystander 27. I think you got kicked off, so some of the questions got pivoted to the Red Rising series. So
That's
either
right.
Sons of Aries questions or Bystander 27 questions would be wonderful right now. So Rik, out of curiosity, what is it you're consuming right now? What do you love?
I'm trying to think. Not an awful lot. Watching terrible television mostly.
Sure.
And reading 70s comics.
Reading 70s comics. All right. What's sticking around for you? What holds what water still?
I've just got through the whole run of Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck, which is very interesting. It was legendary in its time, and it's sort of intended as a satire in the Marvel Universe. I don't know if it works so well as a satire, but it's fascinating as a look into sort of 70s US culture.
And what's it called?
Howard the Duck.
Howard the Dark?
Howard the Duck.
Okay. Howard the Duck. Oh, the Duck.
Yeah.
I know Howard the Duck. Okay. Not well, but a little bit. Yeah. I thought it was How the Dark, and I was like, oh, that's really progressive title for the 70s.
That would be good. That's a great comic. That's the sequel to Bystander 27 right there.
I love that. So Rik, I'm going to ask you one of the questions that popped up.
Sure.
So Rik, how have you found writing during lockdown? Has it affected your process much, or not really? This is one I answered, and I said, unfortunately, it affected me. But I feel like you're just going to be like, I've written 6 books.
Actually, I think about a week before lockdown, you and I had an agreement about transferring the Sons of Aries graphic novels to audio.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started on the audio scripts pretty much as we went into lockdown over here. So I didn't see daylight for about 2 months while I worked on those.
I think that makes sense. I think you got that back to us in record time, and I was shocked to see the page length, and not in a bad way, but I was just like, okay, I've written 20 pages during this time period. What is Rik doing?
You never going for that challenge. I'm tremendously fast.
Yeah, there's writers on Twitter that have those like power hours. They write like an hour together, right? Never doing it with you.
I'll horrify you. I think the best I ever did was 10,000 in a day.
10,000 in a day.
I'm not saying that it was all good, but I did do 10,000 words.
Yeah. For people who don't know the word count of books, that's basically like, what do you think? A tenth of a book, at least? What? I mean, a lot of these novels are popping in at 80,000 nowadays.
Yeah.
Or if it's a new Neil Gaiman one, that's half the book.
but the thing about writing like that is it's great on the day. The next day, I don't think I could move because I've been sitting in a chair for too long.
Oh, sure.
So you lose a day anyway.
Oh yeah. You start looking like the halfway evolution from what is it, like the upright to the upright hominid,
Exactly.
So Rik, got another question for you. What are some of the most precious comics in that collection behind you? Sentimental favorites, rarities, lima bean collections.
The Adventures of Lima Bean Man would obviously be one of them, of course, issue 1.
Obviously, the sidekick of Howard the Duck.
I suppose the most precious comic to me, there's a couple. There's the first Marvel comic I ever read was Iron Man, and I couldn't even tell you what issue number it was. I think it was 37. It was given to me when I was about 5 years old, and it was old then, and it's got somebody's second-hand price written on it and stuff, and it's from about 1971. and I reread it a couple of years ago, and it's a terrible comic, but it was just the gateway drug. It was the first one that got me.
I'm sure there's something to the smell of it too.
Yeah, well, what's left of it?
What's left? Yeah, I've got some amazing Spider-Mans from the early '80s, and they're not doing too well. Those staples and glue don't hold up. No.
I think the other one I got the very first appearance of Master of Kung Fu, which it just meant so much to get it, because I searched for it for about 5 years before I actually found a copy. And when I got it, I bought it on eBay, and it was pristine. It was, this comic was 40 something years old, and it looked like it just come out of a shop the day before. It was amazing. It's the only time I've ever actually trembled when I held a comic, because
really.
Yeah.
Well, what made that one special for you, searching it?
It was because I had the rest of the run, and then it took me ages to get that last issue. Yeah. So
do you miss looking for comics in that
I think
analog way?
I think we're in a golden age when so much stuff has been reprinted now, so you can read the first 100 issues of Spider-Man for next to nothing, really, and you've got eBay, and it's so easy to find stuff now, and often for not very much money. So I kind of enjoyed that, walking around London shops like Forbidden Planet and the old Paradise Alley, which will mean something to somebody.
Forbidden Planet is one of my, yeah.
Well, in the old days, behind Forbidden Planet, when it was at its old location.
Oh, there was an older location than it is now?
Yeah, it used to be on Denmark Street, where all the music shops are. And there was an alleyway behind there. It's the seediest little alleyway you've ever seen. And then you went into a shop that was down this alley, which was about not as wide as the screen that you can see yourself on. And it was like a chain link over the windows. And you went inside, and you had to go upstairs into this strange room that was just clearly an upstairs bedroom full of comics, and you just bought comics there. So I don't think I really missed those times, but it was different, because it was exciting to hold all these comics in your hand. Think, wow, I can complete my collection.
See, I feel like I'm still looking for that rarity. There's a rarity to the analog world that we used to have, right? I remember finding old, what would be my Asimov books. Some of his sillier ones from the early 70s, and you'd find them in library liquidation sales. Now you can find them all online, of course, but it used to be something when you just discovered one that was new or that was different, and somehow
I do still get that, because I drifted into reading Robert Silverberg and his 60s science fiction, and he was ridiculously prolific in the 60s. I mean, I think he doesn't know how many books he wrote then, because he was writing under so many different names.
Oh, wow.
And I don't go online for those. I do just like turn up at charity shops or sort of second-hand emporiums, and my wife's looking for very nice looking antiques or picture frames or whatever, and there's me going, oh look, I found this book, it's 50p, I haven't read this one, and you get excited, and then that makes the day, doesn't it?
It does, and somehow it has ant-like looking alien wearing medieval armor on the cover with like little blasters in its hands, and you're like, this is the book for me.
Yeah, and he doesn't appear in the book. That's the disappointment.
That's always surprised me. I always wondered if they just bought 20 pieces of cover art and then just applied them randomly to. Okay, so what's the worst cover art you've ever had for a book?
Oh wow, I don't know. I did see something recently, but I can't remember what it was for, which is really annoying. But it was really obviously trying to be Star Wars. And it just looked fascinating, but I unfortunately I can't actually remember the name of it.
You better not be talking about Sons of Ares.
No, as if I would.
Okay, so we got another question for us. So for both of us, how do you clearly know the endings of your books / other projects when you start them?
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
I was going to ask you to go first.
Okay, well, I can reveal my great secret is I don't write books in order. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm quite fast, because I often do the start of a book, and then I'll get so far, and then I'll write the end, and then I'll come back to it.
Interesting.
But whenever I do a plot, I don't plot very intensely like you. I work very much in outlines, but I always got the end. That's my starting point for any story is invariably the end, and I work back from that.
See, that's my preferable way of doing things, is finding the end, seeing where I need the characters to end up,
Yeah.
and then reverse engineering their thematic arc and physical arc. And I find that to be easier than somehow being able to have it all in your head in an outlined form, and the A, B, C, D, C, that's always somehow distracted me from writing and also intimidated me from writing, because you'll get to a new point, or a new, you have to get them to, from your outline, page 3 of your outline, B,
Yep.
like the semicolon, you got to get them to that emotional point. And then it starts feeling, disingenuous pretty quickly on.
And I find also, books it can be a slog, because there's a lot of work to write this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing you want is to have a map or an outline that is so detailed that you just get bored by the time you're writing it. And I always think that boredom comes across to any reader. You want to be infused and surprised by it all the time, don't you?
That's really wise to say, and I've tried to relate that often when Random House or whomever I'm working with wants an outline. And you give them an outline almost knowing that it won't be followed with any real fidelity, because you understand that the only way you write is by trying to entertain yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
When the boredom creeps in, I feel that so strongly, because then you'll metastasize this chapter for a week or 2 or 3, and then it'll just become that horrible thing you never want to return to, and you realize, oh, it's because it sucks.
Yeah,
it's because it's boring. It's because we don't need that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's also difficult when. Here's a question for you: when you're bouncing around, do you ever find yourself bouncing around and then finding a place where it has no forward momentum? Like you have a scene that you're writing, and you realize that it has no forward momentum, and it kind of makes you you have to abandon it or delete it, and then.
It's an interesting question. I would say these days probably not, but that's tempting fate. Mm-hmm. Early on, I wrote differently. These days I've learned from how I've written and other things that have been published that I prefer much shorter chapters. So you start to look at how much punch you can get into each chapter. So you'll find that probably nothing in Bystander 27 probably goes much over about 10 pages of a chapter.
No, it flies. And I think that it borrows from, well, it doesn't borrow from, but it's a trend we saw pop up in young adult fiction.
Yeah.
Early on, of the chapters being so much shorter. And it creates, even if the chapters, it creates, puts the onus upon you to make things flow in that chapter, because in order for that chapter to have a point, you can't be like diddling, dallying, getting to it 13 pages later.
Yeah, because you do exactly the same thing. Your chapters are when I was reading Red Rising, I was like, oh wait a minute, this chapter's gone over 10 pages. I don't have time for this. Come on, speed it up, because so many of them are so short.
Yeah, I have 3-4 page chapters. It's because you're trying to transpose that idea onto the reader and then move on, But I also think it creates that addictive quality where you cannot surrender to the evening. You know what I mean? It's 3 a.m. You keep reading because the next chapter's only 5 pages. I'll stop after that.
Exactly. Yeah. But you said like young adult fiction was where you picked that up from. For me, I came at it from a different route. Actually, I was reading a lot of crime fiction. So Raymond Chandler, huge fan of Raymond Chandler, and Donald Westlake's books. And they are always very, very brief chapters. Westlake would devote a chapter to describing a location, and it's 3 pages, and that's it. And it's like reading I'm going to say estate agent, a real estate agent.
Sure.
It's like reading their brief on the location, and then the next chapter you get what's going to happen there. It's so fast, and you think, well, all I know is the location. I'm going to get to the next chapter, and suddenly you've read 50 pages or 100 pages and not really noticed, because it's done with such speed the whole time. It's very economical.
Maybe I should listen to my mom and my sister more. They're the ones who read the crime fiction in our family. And they I think they made that comparison. I like how you structured it like a modern crime fiction book. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like a James Patterson book. I'm like, that's not the comparison I want, Mom. No, it's really readable.
No, play that. There are worse comparisons.
There are. I just don't have to be 80 million a year, So all right, we got another question for you, Rik, on Bystander.
Yeah,
it's not a spoil. Well, I'll read it out for everyone who can't see this. It's not a spoiler to say that the book ends at a point that could very easily lead to a sequel. Are you thinking about writing one, or do you like that you've left it on the note that suggests the story goes on after the last page, like with comic books?
It's written as a standalone book, so it's certainly that was my intent. But there's always room for a sequel, and you always want to go back to ideas, and you always want to revisit characters that you like. So it's kind of, the answer is yes and no. It does end on a point where what happens next, but at the same time, it is a complete story in its own right, and it wraps up several stories by the end, I think.
What makes you return to a story? I mean, often I'm sure that you've returned to a story you didn't plan on returning to, or do you actually like compartmentalizing it like that?
I tend to find I've got too many other things I want to do. So I want to move on to a different book every time. And when I was writing serial fiction, even then I had the rule that at the end of the book, the bad guy dies, because I didn't want to be stuck in that rut of keep using the same characters again and again. I always wanted to come at it fresh with something new. So I think that's kind of more fun. But for all that, I mean, there's always a sequel in mind. There's always the idea of going back to a story and looking at it at another angle.
Mm-hmm.
You're the opposite, of course, because you are the king of the serial now, I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know about king, maybe the court jester, but I enjoy it because I like that the books do not focus necessarily on world building to the extent that some epic fantasy or probably epic fantasy is the best comparison. How much time that a Brandon Sanderson or a George R. Martin spends on making the world is spread out through my books. So my books, particularly the first three, they're shorter and spend more time on the characters and on the decisions they make than on building out the world. So I thought that it was enabling me to continue to make the world richer every time I go back. And that makes it fun because it sheds light on moments in the earlier novels, which perhaps I didn't get across or wasn't able to get across, or an editor told me I had to cut 4 pages of fat from. So now naturally I don't have the 4 pages of fat that they told me to cut. I didn't save those as a wise man would. Instead, I have to rewrite them, which which leads to the same note from my editor saying enough world building on the new one.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just getting to go back and revisit. And it's not so much that it's dipping back into the world and reuniting with old friends. A lot of times for me, it's that their character arcs aren't totally complete yet for me. Because I think what's the most important is kind of the thematic arcs that span years for characters, and getting to return to that over a 13-year period over someone's life and see the evolution from, who they were to who they get to be is pretty fun for me.
Which is kind of where we did the graphic novels, I suppose, because they are prequel, and you kind of got to pick up on a character who's barely in the first Red Rising book. He's very, very much a background character until towards the end, isn't he? And and he went, let's tell his story. And that's just, it's a completely different bit of world building. And I think I had to summarize your whole world building in 3 pages.
Yeah, I remember that trial of fire, and did a peerless job, of course.
Thank you.
But I look at writing maybe this Red Rising world a little bit, because there's so many things that don't make it onto the page when I write. Mostly because I'll write, 5,000 word day, and then all of a sudden, you keep about 2,000 words of it. Yeah. And the Red Rising graphic novels, Sons of Ares, were a way to keep exploring it. It's almost more like you're an archaeologist and you're discovering little things that are buried in the sand. Yeah. And I find that to be really emotionally rewarding, because especially when you get to tie something back in to something, I wrote probably, was it 2010 or 2011 or something like that. Okay. But I suppose that's also one of the elements that makes comics so fun for me.
It is.
The circularity that is in the storytelling, or perhaps things that sometimes the storytelling, not always the consequences.
This is why I find myself reading 70s Marvel comics today. It's like, let's tie it all in together. How does it all work? And it's great. You are archaeologists mining all these things, aren't you?
It's also so fun to find that first iteration of an idea in the Marvel world or in the comic world, and then you see what it becomes. The first Batman comics, for instance. This is incredible to see the evolution.
With the Red Rising graphic novel, I know the bit that I really liked, and I really liked I suppose I hope that it surprised you, because I don't think you were expecting it. Is that one of the characters uses the song that's at the start of the very first Red Rising book.
That's right.
I found that, I thought, I can find a place for this and it'll be nice and really resonant, and I thought it'd really work well. And I think when we did the audio, I then had to write more lines for it to make it work. Like, thanks.
Very, very true. And
Yeah.
what's so fun about that is that it makes it seem as though the world is deeper, and it slowly builds it out, because you see characters, instead of reacting to, or creating new things out of scratch. If you use something in world, it seems like a relic of that world, and then deepens the world, because the characters then have appreciation for the culture that was made up, 10 years ago before the writing. And so I really enjoyed that moment. Out of curiosity, though, what was your favorite moment to write in the first two graphic novels or comics?
I think I probably liked the one in the second where, and I'm just going to go spoilers here, and we'll have to live with that. But I'll be as vague as I can. There's a character who uses grav boots to run up the side of a spaceship as it takes off, and it was such a perfect visual moment. I couldn't resist it, and I gave it to the artist Eli to do as much as he could. I gave him splash pages to do it with that, and it looked fantastic. It had so much energy. It's like that. There is another bit in which Fitchner has a fight with somebody, doesn't he? And it's all built up to a double-page spread.
There is, yeah. And are you talking about the latter half of Wrath?
Yeah.
And I think that was building for us for the entirety of the first two comics. And I think that was my favorite sequence too. I could tell you were just having a damn fine time writing it, because everything goes wrong, and there's explosions, the ship's collapsing, and it's a really fun moment. Someone asked me how the experience is different, than writing novels or writing or contributing to the comic with you. And I think it's being surprised by scenes like that. It's being surprised by the visual reason, the calamity that someone else created in my world. You know what I mean? You just created absolute chaos, and then getting to see Eli do those inks when they first came in. Oh, that was so cool.
It was brilliant, wasn't it? Just absolutely.
I mean, is there anything more fun than getting the what is it, the pen? Is it called the pencils, or when you don't have the inks in yet? It's the sketches.
Yeah, when it's just sketch work, it is absolutely amazing. It's so good to see. And sometimes I think those sketches have more energy than the final product. Not to pick on Eli. He's not. I'm not thinking of him particularly, but I know I'm working on something at the moment with somebody, and he sent me the pencils, and they're so good. There's so much power in them.
I don't disagree with you on that. I think it's because there's a lot more. It seems a lot more life in them. In a way, right? Because the strokes are so hurried and rushed compared to the final product that it feels so raw.
It's that energy of having to get it down, isn't it? It's all in there. It's the first draft before you tighten it up.
And I'm sure you at this point can see their flow too. See what you're like. Yeah. His hand was cramping that day. All right, so we have one question to finish this off with. Thanks for hanging with us, guys, especially through the technical glitches. But last question.
I'm going to hold up my hand and say that was completely my fault.
No, not at all. I mean, it's high internet time in the UK.
Should have started in the comic room. That was the answer, wasn't it?
I mean, how did you not start in the comic room? Is the question. I honestly feel like it's so apropos. So, if we were going to, I love this question. If you were going to be a supervillain, what would you be? One, your name, your powers, and your weakness. All right.
Shall I go first?
Please.
My powers would be, I think I could fly, but on a trail of blood, and I'd call my character.
Jesus.
I'd call my character Red Rising. But my kryptonite and weakness would probably be a copyright lawsuit.
Fair enough. That's the fear of all of us, right? Oh man, what would your name be? Red Rising. Okay, yep. Well, shit, I have to follow that. My name would be Millisecond, and my powers would be I could change or stop time for only 5 minutes a day, because I don't want it to be too addictive. and the 5 minutes is aggregate. So it's not just 5 minutes at one time. I can stop in like 2-second increments, or like, I'm having that really delicious bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios in the morning, and I can just pause on that flavor, and then, hopefully fast forward through the workout to get rid of it. But my kryptonite would probably be peanut butter and honey, because it's my kryptonite right now. I'll wake up like this weird, like a mummy summoned from some Egyptian crypt in the night, and I have really bad vision. I won't even put on my contacts, and I'll just creep down the stairs, kind of feeling my way down, and I'll just pour honey into the peanut butter, and I'll just eat it, and then I'll go to bed feeling so guilty, and then I'll wake up in the morning with that horrible sugar stomach ache, and just be like, why am I afflicted with this weakness? So I can't even look at a jar of Nutella, man. Like if I see Nutella, it's gonna be like inside me within 3 seconds. So perhaps my milliseconds would, I'd be like, pause time.
Yeah.
I don't need that Nutella.
No,
yeah.
You just eat more. You would.
I would. I would. But I just think that, you'd be able to savor those moments of the day,
Is this really a supervillain power though? Just eating? Is that enough?
Well, I'm eating everyone else's food off their plates.
Okay.
But I'm doing it with such speed they can't even tell. Plus, I'd be like really good at tennis,
Well, I think just stealing other people's food, that's true evil anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. It might be. I was told by my girlfriends I have this natural disposition just to like graze off their plates.
See, I think that your supervillain name shouldn't be Millisecond. I think it should probably be Fast Food.
Fast food?
Yeah.
Fast food. Yeah, well, that's a little too American, isn't it? Well, anyway, guys, thank you so much for hanging with us. Please check out Bystander 27. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that, yes, there will be a third Red Rising Sons of Ares graphic novel that Rik and I are conspiring on right now, and hopefully we can entertain and have better villains than the supervillain I just came up with. So I apologize for that. Riks was far superior, and I bow to his wisdom. So thank you so much, guys.
Perhaps I'm just more experienced.
You're the veteran. You're the veteran of the wars, man. I'm just this up and comer that needs to get his shit together.
Thanks so much for your time, Pierce.
Oh, thanks for hanging, Rik. Take care, guys.
Speak to you soon.